Hello, everybody. You know, when we install the JAMP framework and we want to uninstall it, one of the commands we have to use is the remove framework. And I think about the framework all the time. I talk to a lot of customers about that. I met Charles and Josh about a year ago, and I was always looking for someone who would do something that kind of showed what we meant by framework. And what I saw these guys doing at a presentation, at an Apple event about a year ago, really excited me, and I really started thinking about bringing them out to speak to you right about that time. So without further ado, I want to introduce Charles and Josh from Expedia, talk a little bit about what they're doing with the framework and the API.
Wow, lots of people out here for the API. So, my name is Charles Ludwig. I am a senior technology lead at Expedia. Been there 2 years. Josh joined us in January of this year. Want to introduce yourself?
I'm Josh Rosma. I'm a systems engineer at Expedia. I've been working numerous positions for the past 6-7 years with the Casper suite directly.
Yeah. So for a long time, we've been managing the JSS very manually. When we started planning the new JSS 9 environment, we really wanted a way to turn the mundane, tedious tasks that we have into more automated process. There's a lot of high probability for mistakes and omissions happening. So we wanted to leverage the API to make things more efficient, get done more quickly and accurately. We can use this in multiple ways. The first is we can make changes to the settings in the JSS. We can do advanced reporting or run logic-based client-side tasks. So let's get forward with the next. So what it means to be RESTful. The JSS utilizes an implementation of the RESTful API, so we'll be discussing this in more detail through the presentation. Replace all policies with. We'll be doing a step-by-step example of something that was a manual process, which we turned into an automated task leveraging the API. Radar and PrinterChooser, client API usage. These are two things that we're leveraging in our production environment right now. Radar, which we'll get more into later, but it grew out of the need to figure out how to properly scope our subnets. In any complex network environment, comes challenges with things. Some of the issues that we had were spanning Wi-Fi over multiple subnets and network changes being made without us knowing, and it was causing us problems. Next is a PrinterChooser. This was created because we didn't have any good way of adding printers on the Macs. On the Windows side, we use a nice third-party tool that allows us to add printers, but it's not Mac compatible right now. So Josh came up with the great idea of how to leverage the API to add printers. I see a lot of people post out on the JAMP forums that they have problems installing printers, and I think that this one will really help people out. So, revision control of the JSS. We're going to touch on some advanced topics on how to use the API to track individual changes in the JSS, as well as potentially extending this integration even better. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Josh, and he's going to get into the meat and potatoes of this.
All right, so just a quick question. How many people have used an API or know what a RESTful API is? Okay, so quite a few of you. That's really good. I hope I'm gonna cover just the basics of what a RESTful API is, and then we'll go on to the more advanced topics from there, just so everybody's on the same page. A RESTful API is really basically just web calls. There's 4 different main web calls. We'll go through them, but you have to remember they're really just standard web calls with different methods that are used. If anybody has done many things with just web-based programming or HTML in general, 2 of these are going to be very, very familiar. The first is get. The get command is basically, or the get method is basically just a way of specifying that you would like to get a certain resource by a specific URL. So you pass the URL to the server, it gives you back information. You can do all of these commands on 2 different types of things. The collection is basically a get request to say, give me give me an example, or give me every item inside of a collection. So if you ask for all of the printers, it's going to give you all of the printers. It doesn't necessarily give you all the detail for them. So if you get an entire collection, you might not see all of the printer data, but you'll get, at least the ID number and the name. But the actual fields that come back can be somewhat dependent on what collection you're addressing. And then you can also do a get on a specific element. So in this case, of the printers, you could say get printer 2. And it would give you all the information about printer 2 that you need. So it'll respond also with the same ID and name, but maybe also the information and maybe what driver it uses. Anything that's stored in the JSS for that object. Put, and this isn't one that you usually see, but basically it is a way of updating elements. So in the case of a REST type API, generally speaking, if you put a collection, you're going to update the entire collection. So it's a way of replacing all of the printers, for example, with an entirely different subset of printers. In the JSS API, you do not put collections. It's kind of one of those safety measures that if you forget to specify an ID number because you meant to do an element, it doesn't automatically erase all of your entire collection. You can update an element, however. So if you're going to put printer number 2, it'll replace all the data that you specify or for that printer number. Post is another one that a lot of people who have come from the HTML world are used to. It's specifically to create a new member element. So if you address the entire collection, it will just create a sub-element within. So if you address the printers, it's going to make a new printer. This is often seen in the old web world with forms a lot. You usually post a form and it creates basically a new reply to the form. Is how you kind of think of it. To create an element, it would create a new sub part of the element. So should you do this, and as an example, again, this is one that's not used with the JSS, but for, let's say, a policy, for example, you have multiple packages. Technically, via REST API, you could put a packages element within it and it would create a new subclass. This isn't used like that, so just don't think of it as using that, but you can basically create a new element within a collection. The last one is delete. For the exact same reason that you can't put an entire collection, you can't delete an entire collection. It's a very good safety protocol to not be able to do that. And you basically just say, I would like to delete a specific element, it's deleted. That's basically what it means to have a RESTful API. It's all using web protocols. You specify what method you'd like to use and what address you'd like to do it, the URL for that resource. And from there, you can kind of just work through how it's going to work. One address you should really remember is this one right here. Your JSS port number if needed, /API. It puts the following slash if you need it. But this is a great way if you're getting started and you want to program something in the API and you just want to see, what's possible, what elements look like, what the XML is going to look like when you are creating elements or whatnot. Go to this address and just poke around. It's a really great way to get there. There's a similar address for JSS 8. If you're still using that, I don't remember the URL because I don't use JSS 8. But if you use, it's out there, you can just Google it. I think Rich Brown has a guide that will walk you through all the hidden URLs. But for 9, your URL /API, and you can see what changes too. If Jamf comes out and expands what is available in the API, this is the first place you're probably going to notice it, is you can just come in here and start poking. I'm going to go through a couple of things here. Again, you see the get there, so we're going to get a specific thing. And if you click on it, it drops down, and there's a lovely try it out button. And so this is getting, again, that entire collection. This is getting the OS 10 configuration profiles collection. You click the try it out button, this is the request URL, so it's right there. If you want to know what it is, you can copy and paste. And then the response body. What you'll see is that pretty much everything comes out with a size. It's kind of nice if you want to parse this as an XML. You can look at that size to see how many elements there are. And then you below that, as you see here, again, the ID and name, like I was mentioning before. Shows you the ID, it shows you the name. It doesn't show you a lot of the details, because again, you're addressing that collection rather than a specific element within the collection. But you can see all those. Again, with this specific example, there's only one. I only have one configuration profile. So look at that element. Here's the get address that you would use to look at the element. You have the OS configuration profile, ID, and then whatever ID you specify. Again, there's a guess parameters, so if you don't know what all your IDs are, you can usually just click guess parameters, it'll find a valid ID, and then you can click try it out. Again, it shows you the request URL, so you can see that. And then the XML response body is great because it shows you all the information about it. And this is what you'd really dig into if you wanted to start programming or changing this, is these, the response body. And so there's not too much information here. The only thing I've really modified here is the UID. I just wiped that out. Usually there'd be something there. But you can see all the information there, and you can parse this and program it using XML tools, or if you know exactly what type of information you're looking for, you can use text-based tools as well, as I do in my example. It's a little bit quicker to use those. It's not quite as flexible if you get unexpected data. And we'll go look at the subset information. So this is really useful if you don't want, especially if you're looking at a computer object that has tons of data. You got general and you got, machine data. You got all this data. And if your script only needs to look at a certain part, you can look at a specific subset. I want to draw your attention to the implementation notes. It tells you how to use it. It also mentions a few other things that you can even though it doesn't show it in the JSS API how-to, you can actually use, instead of rather than ID, you can use name. A lot of these implementation notes contain a lot of information in there. Just drop them down, take a look, see what's available, even if it isn't in that overall field. A lot of times you can still do it. And in this specific example, though, you can look at a subset. So we're seeing the general information here, we're seeing the scope information here. And as you see, rather than seeing the general and scope, you're just seeing the scope because that's all I asked for. And again, going back to the implementation notes, if you want a general and scope, you can put an ampersand in there. So if you want multiple sets of data, but not all of it, you can still specify exactly what you'd like to be returned. Yep, thought I went. Okay, so here again, very similar. You can post, so you can update something. You can put, if you can post, or you can make a new one. You can put for an update, or you can delete. Those are all very similar to the way that you get something. You just specify the method, a different method. All right, walk through these. Okay, so now I want to go through an example. This isn't the most well done example for a production environment. I didn't do a lot of error checking and whatnot. I really wanted to walk through and just give you something, an idea that you could work with. This specifically is to replace an all policies with. As many of you have known, we're using Casper Admin. If you upload a new package or a new package, so if you have an update to Firefox or Chrome, you can upload that to your JSS, you can categorize it, and then you can right-click on it and say replace in all categories with. So you can click on your old one, sorry, and replace in all categories with. So you can, if all your configurations have an old version of Firefox or an old version of Chrome, you can instantly update it in all configurations without having to go through each specific one and replace it. Something like that has been really lacking with regard to replace in all policies with. I'm sure many of you who update Firefox or update Chrome after it's tested want to just replace all your old installations of Firefox. And maybe you have that in your new Mac setup, as well as your Firefox setup, as well as your standard web browser setup or your policies. It's kind of a pain to have to go through each of those, remembering which one of those you're deploying Firefox and Chrome in, and go through each of those and find out which ones have it, meticulously go through, delete the old package, bring in the new one. So we're going to go through and actually make a script that does this for us. This is one thing that APIs really excel at, is doing very repeatable tasks over and over, and very accurately, and going through everything that you might not have time to do, or just you forgot about. So I'm going to walk through building this script. One thing, so what you do generally when you first start having an idea, or when you first start building a script, is you define all your variables. Your API information, your JSS ID. So we're going to do that. And then for this specific one, we're going to go in and gather a list of all the policies. To do this, we'll obviously address the collection, and we're going to just grab a list of every single policy that our JSS has. Then we'll loop through all of those, searching for policies which deploy a specific package. I don't know which one exactly we had, but I'm basically going to be looking for an ID number. This can get, like I said, very fancy, and you can specify with a certain names, and you can have scripts that do all this. But I'm just going to do basic and look for a specific ID number of a specific package and replace it with a different one. So then we'll replace any found entries with the updated package, just replacing that in the XML. And then finally, we'll update the policy record by updating the updated XML page. Kind of walk through this. So we have our JSS server specified. I love to put this actually in a variable, because if it ever changes or you want to port it somewhere else, it's there right up top. You don't have to go through your code and dig and find it, because some of these commands can look pretty ugly after when you start putting them in there. So we'll specify the server, your username and password for your service account. Little sidebar on security. This username and password can do whatever you tell it you can do. Generally, because if you're going to have this script stored somewhere that is an insecure location, you really want to lock it down. I mean, this one's going to have the ability to read and write your policies. So keep it secure. Don't just store it somewhere where it isn't necessarily safe, because you really want to make sure that it is locked. The username and password is really only known by certain people, and lock down that account to only what you need it to do. If you have an account that just reads things, only give it that access. So then I specify the old package ID and the new package ID, and then what I want to do with it. If you look at a policy that installs packages, you have, what do you want to do? Do you want to cache it? Do you want to install it? Do you want to install a cache? So we're going to install it. We're not going to fill the user templates. We're not going to fill the existing users. And we're not going to need to update that auto run. And then I specify a location for our temp file. Curl, which I'm going to be using in the script, works a lot better, a lot easier if you give it an actual file to use rather than trying to store this all in a variable. So I'm just going to store everything I need in that temp file. So this is going to look pretty messy. What I really want to do, what I really want to call your attention to, is just one line here. In this specific thing, all we're doing is gathering a list of all policies. That's going to be in that all policies line. So just on the temp file, that one line, all policies, we're going to use the curl command, specifying the username and password to get a content type of HTML. Sorry, so the content type is first, get the content type, and then use the method of get. That get URL is going to be the exact one we've talked about with the collection, just URL, that resources/policies, and that will get you the entire collection. The XML is not necessarily formatted properly. It doesn't have a lot of line breaks, doesn't have a lot of indents, which is fine if you're using an XML parser. However, it's a lot easier if you're going to be doing text-based things to format that, to put in those line breaks and such. I find the easiest way to do that is to use XML-lint to just format that output into that variable. So now we have a list of all policies. All it has is the IDs and names. And it looks like this. So this is just a subset of them. One thing I would like to draw your attention to, especially with policies as well, is you can see these ID right at the top two, 129 and 130. Those are one computer. Well, when you get all policies, it also uses CAF for remote sessions, which are one-time policies, basically. You don't see these when you use the web interface of your JSS. You do see them in the API. So make sure if you care about those, if you want to not mess with those, make sure that you're excluding them. But then we actually have a couple actual general policies with a couple active directory policies at the top. So I'm going to gather the list of all policies, and that's what I got back. We're going to loop through all policies. Again, there's a lot here, and we're going to take little by little, so I don't want you to look at all of it. Just look at the while loop. While we read line do. So line is literally a variable that's just going to have one line of data, and that data is going to be fed in from, if you look at the bottom, that done line. I'm going to take all policies and inject it into awk to get basically just the IDs of all of those policies. I don't care about the names. I just want to get line by line every single ID. So that's what this is going to do. It's going to go line by line through there, assign every ID to line, and then walk through it. So we're going to find the package and replace. So the find part is that if statement there. It basically is looking for a package with an ID number of the old policy. If it finds a count of greater than 0, this policy has that package in it. If it doesn't, it goes on to the next one. This if statement just executes, it ends, and it goes to the next one. But if it does have it, we're going to replace it. That's what the grep files do. Like I mentioned before, there's a lot of information about each package that's in a policy. There's specifically 5 lines. So I'm looking at using grep to grab all 5 lines after the ID, and then getting rid of just the ID portion of that and then deleting it. So basically all I'm left with is just the ID tag, the actual ID of the package, and the ID tag that ends it. And I'm doing that because I want to replace just that. I don't want to have to deal with replacing those other fields. I just delete them. And then after that, I use that sed command to look for that old package ID, which is all I'm left with on that line, and replace it with the new package ID, also the action and the fill user templates and all that data that I specified above in the variables. So I'm just going to build that out. I don't have any line breaks there. That's purely for ease of use with sed. It doesn't, sometimes sed and awk don't do line breaks very well. So I'm just going to ignore them. XML doesn't require it. But at the end, if you notice, this printf statement is using an XML lint just to format it again, make it look nice. It's not strictly required, but if I was going to do any other post-processing, it's kind of good practice to format it again. And I'm going to export that to that temp file. So a formatted version of that temp file now has my new package in it, and that's it. I think that's, yeah. So we found it, replace it. This is what that looks like after I get rid of everything. In this case, it's looking at ID 123. And I basically, this is immediately after getting rid of all of the trailing lines. So all I have is the ID. And then I replace it with ID 125, that action, that failure template, you know, all that data that's needed to define that package. And then we're going to update the policy record. This is actually pretty easy. At this point, we have a new XML, which specifies a new package. And all we have to do is send it back up. So again, that curl command, second from the bottom, it's basically specifying again that you're using the application XML type. And we're now going to put it, because we're updating. And we're putting it using a specified file, that temp file. And we're going to put it down there, the JSS server, and specifying a resource and specifying that we're updating the packages. When that's done, we're going to remove it. Quick note on this XML bit, that you can also use JSON formatting. However, you can only read that. You can't ever edit it back. So if you want to do editing, you have to use XML. Just kind of aside with that as well. So then, yeah, so I updated it and I removed it. This is what I get back. You should always check for this. You should always check to make sure that a policy ID is returned. That means that the operation was successful. I don't check for that in my script. Again, it's not really fleshed out for a lot of error checking, but you should. If you're updating packages, just to make sure no errors occurred, you should make sure that the policy ID is returned, as well as maybe what policy ID is returned if you're a little worried about what's going on. Okay, so we did a brief history of we did a brief understanding of what a RESTful API is, went through building an example of how to use that. Something, I mean, it's a pretty easy example, but you really could build on this to do any set of number tasks you want. Now I want to go into what we call client API usage. And for this, I literally mean the API is being accessed from our client machines, the ones running in the field. I want to again mention about the security required of this. You're going to probably be storing the API username and password on your client machines, so be aware of all that entails. So make really sure that these are locked down and that you don't really care necessarily if those credentials are compromised based on what rights they have. So two things that we are using in our environment specifically are Radar and PrinterChooser. And both of these run on our client machines to set specific settings or to get data from them. I'll talk about Radar first. Radar is a project that kind of came out of, and Charles touched on this before, came out of the fact that we have a very highly distributed network with subnets which change and with entire Wi-Fi subnets which span multiple buildings. So even if they're on one subnet, we really cannot physically tell where those machines are at or which server they should be going to. So I kind of broke down and we found we needed to find another solution. And so what we went through is we decided that rather than trying to drive this down from the server and the server trying to figure out where this machine is and you know, put all this load on the server and this logic into the server, which might change without our knowledge, we're going to put the onus on our client machines to figure it out for themselves. So how we do that is we have our client machine, and it pulls down that collection, pulls down the entire collection of all the distribution points that we have. It doesn't have any writability to these or anything like that. It just pulls down the list, pulls down the IP addresses or the server names, and it figures out where all of them are. And then it goes through and it pings the first one. It goes, okay, that point was 200 milliseconds. And then it goes on to the next one. And yep, okay, so that one was 400 milliseconds, for example. And we try the third one. And that one's 400 milliseconds as well. And this would get really, really tedious and take a long time, especially if you have a lot of distribution points. So we thought about this and said, you know, rather than going sequentially, all of these operations don't depend on any previous data. You know, the fact that distribution point 3 is 400 milliseconds didn't depend at all on the fact that distribution point 1 was 200 milliseconds. So I'm going to do this in parallel. And we basically spin off a subtask for each independent distribution point and then have it write the result back and then just wait for them all to finish. So we do that, and we find out that, look, in this example, distribution point 5 is the closest. And I put them in brackets because obviously this is latency, it's not your bandwidth. So we are making an assumption that the one that has the lowest latency is also the highest bandwidth, which is not always the case, but it's something we had to compromise on. And is often the case. So that's what we do. And then from this point, the client machine then takes that information and writes back its preferred distribution point to the JSS. So that the next time that the client machine needs to download something, it grabs it from the closest distribution point, or the last one it checked in. We actually have this running on all of our machines and watching for network changes. And so it will run within about a minute and a half from any network change after the IP address is grabbed. So our client machines always know where they should be and where they should be checking in. And again, it takes less than a minute. So generally speaking, unless they're kicking off policies that download packages immediately, they're probably going to be getting it from the most closest location. So then we had another example. We have PrinterChooser. We have a very distributed environment, many buildings, many printers. And what we had been doing is going through and defining policies for example, our 4th floor in Bellevue. Someone can install all the 4th floor rather than going through and figuring out each individual printers. And this is kind of a support nightmare because we change a printer and we have to update it in that one, or we add a printer. We got to go through all these policies. Our users have to sort through all of these policies, and they have to install an entire floor. What if they only want one? So we were trying to figure out a way that feasibly to do this, given and it kind of modeled a little bit off of our Windows PrinterChooser as well. Same structure, where you can drill down into a regional area and then pick a printer. So what PrinterChooser does is it goes through and it grabs all of the printers that are defined in your JSS. And we utilize the notes field specifically for this. And in that notes field, we have very customizable or very formatted data. So the first line tells you where it's located. In this example, we've got North America, Bellevue, headquarters floor 6, which is kind of the same distribution as the other one. And in this, you can see that, okay, we're looking at all of the 6th floor printers in Bellevue. You can use the drop-down to figure out where this printer may actually be. If you want to go to North America and drive down to a different system, you can do that. Or you can actually grab a specific printer and it will install it. It uses the JSS binary to specify the printer and grab it. One other thing that we use in that information field is a specific driver package to look for. So if you try to install this color printer that's highlighted and it looks for a driver, it knows which driver, that information's in there, so it knows which driver to look for. And if it finds that file doesn't exist in the system, it says, okay, I need to install drivers. And then the third line in that information is a custom policy trigger. So if it doesn't have the driver installed, it calls the custom policy trigger. So maybe this one's a Canon printer, so it calls a custom policy of Canon. And so it downloads that driver first and then installs the printer. If that file is already there, it just installs the printer. It doesn't worry about the driver. So it kind of smartly looks at whether or not that's needed. We do a cache on all of the machines just because the printer list is so large that it can take a while to pull all that information down over the API. So we do a once-a-day cache update that's done in the background. Again, run client side. The users never really see it. To cache all that information on their machine. It also looks for updates. So if there's an update, it will rebuild that cache. If there's something wrong, the user can actually refresh the cache themselves with that button. It'll go through about a minute and a half or so and go through all the printers and pull all of the data it needs so all that information is cached. Here, there's also an add all button. If we were up a little bit higher in the organization, we wouldn't necessarily see that. You only see that if there are printers available on that floor. And if you click that button, similar to our old setup, it will add all of the 6 floor printers in this case. And then when they're done, they can just click done, it goes away. They want to install a printer later on, go to a different building, they can do that, and it grabs that printer for them. And all we really need to do is update the printers in the JSS, and it will actually grab all that information it needs for us and rebuild this on all of our machines. Actually, is there anything we should add to that?
We have not open sourced this.
We have not open
Piece
sourced
yet.
this PrinterChooser yet. We have open sourced the radar stuff. This one I want to work on a little bit better and comment a little bit more before we open source it. The radar stuff is all open sourced. So if you'd like to use it, you can. I will be releasing an update probably next week. Just a minor change to it, just so I have some.
You want to talk about 9.6 and
Not yet. I have some changes that I want to put in there, mainly with regard to what if, like I said, it pings. What if a server isn't necessarily available? Sometimes servers aren't available because ping doesn't work or that traffic's not being routed. So we basically have a fallback URL we're using for that.
is the PrinterChooser something that you guys feel we should open source and that you would leverage? Yeah?
Okay. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll definitely do that. So go through there. Now we get into the more advanced portion. How much time are we looking at?
Half hour.
Okay. This is the stuff I'm really excited about. So, how many of you have also used revision control of some system? Git? Yeah? Perforce? Yeah, okay. So I'm a huge fan. I'm a huge fan of revision control and seeing what changes are happening over time.
Is anyone leveraging it right now in their environment?
The JSS made some improvements with, I think it was 9.5.1, or it shows you who changed something and when it changed, but it doesn't show you what changed. And that can be really problematic. I mean, if you're going through and your policy that was working fine for 3 months suddenly stops working, you can go in there and say, yep, okay, Charles went in there on Monday and made a change, and it's now broken, and we don't know why. What did he change? I have no idea. I have no idea what he changed, but I know he changed it, so I can put his blame at him, but I can't fix it. And that's important. Because I want to fix it. Well, I would love to yell at Charles all day long, but in the end, I want to make it good for our customers, so I want to fix this. So you can use revision control, and you can, as we saw before, everything in the API is accessible as an XML object. You can pull down any information you want from your JSS. You can export the entire thing, or just the parts you really want to look at, and you can pull that down into a repository, which you then revision control. And so you can, on some basis, or on like maybe a daily basis, you pull down every single object, and then you see what changes, you commit it, and then so you can track that, right? I mean, you can go back and you can say, okay, what did this policy look like a month ago? Just from these automatic exports, which you can run on a scheduled basis. What did my JSS look like a month ago? What does this policy look like a month ago? What does this printer look like a month ago? And you can look at what it looked like a month ago, or yesterday, or 10 minutes ago, as long as you're pulling down this information quickly enough. Because again, these are all just XML text objects, and revision control works great on text objects. So you can look at all of this and all these details. Now, this gets really interesting when you start thinking about automatic workflows and things that you can do custom triggers and hooks if you know Git, of actually writing things back to the JSS, like when you commit. This can get real interesting in that you take the control out of the JSS, specifically the web environment that you're used to, and you can actually make your Git or your stash repository or whatever you're using for revision control. You can make that what ends up making the change in your JSS, because so it really gives you, rather than just looking at changes, you're instituting them, and you can also pass them through. If you're into, I use Git a lot, so I'll go back to that quite a bit. But you can go have a branching process, or you can have feature requests, so you can have different different main branches. So if you have your development branch and maybe you have a staging environment, you can actually merge that in. It auto gets merged to your staging environment. You can possibly merge that into your master one, and it gets merged into your production environment. You can have workflows that have approval workflows that are built into your Git environment that you couldn't necessarily do with the JSS. And the JSS is either all on or all off. You can't have approval workflows that are built into it. If you use something like this, you can. And the general process kind of goes like this. You have your client, or you have your administrator machine. This is your machine that you're using. You're running Git or Perforce on it. And in this case, I'm going to commit. I'm going to commit something. Let's say I'm doing it to my master branch. And also, I'll make that commit to my master branch, which goes up and uploads to our stash server. I'm going to take that, and I have a Git hook on my stash server, which is just a standard replicate. This is a server-side thing. I don't have a lot of options with what I can do. I don't have a lot of scripts that I'm allowed to upload to our stash environment. A very low-level abilities there. But I do have a replicate. So I can automatically replicate any single commit with a Git hook using SSH and public-private keys to another server, which I fully control. Using that, I can do whatever I want. I can execute any command I want. I can do any process I want. And in this case, something we're doing right now, and something we'll kind of go over, but in our case, we're specifically looking at scripts and extension attributes, basically the scripts that are stored in the JSS. And every time that we commit one of those, it goes in and compares every single script to what is currently in the JSS. And if it finds a difference, it changes it. So we still get that the JSS saying, yeah, this API account changed at this time. It doesn't give me more information. But I can go into my stash account, or my Git account, and look at what changed, who changed it, what approvals I had. And we can really, truly revision control the JSS. And I think that's, personally, I'm really excited about it. We will be, I'm kind of waiting a little bit, but we will be expanding this to our revision control, our policies, and really anything else that changes on a regular basis, but we really need some change control around. Yeah, do we want to? Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, there are some changes. We're doing a bit of a workaround in our environment for the scripts and such because of some lingering issues with 9.5. But as soon as those are worked out, and they might be worked out now, there was some updates in 9.6 that I just noticed a couple days ago and haven't really got a chance to dig into that may have fixed it. I had a bug request or a bug open and a feature request, and they appear that they may have been fixed. So after that gets fixed, I will also be open sourcing this. I don't have anything else. We have 15 minutes? Or, yeah, a little bit longer. 20 minutes or so?
25 minutes, 23 minutes.
Questions?
Do you want to?
Okay, so before we go into questions, can I get a round of applause for all this cool stuff that you guys are putting out? Awesome. So, questions? Anybody?
During your package replacement or the policy replacement script, does anywhere in there it check if there's not more than one package added to that policy so that it doesn't overwrite and say it's only got Firefox or Chrome instead of having maybe Chrome and Firefox all at once?
So, question.
Restate it, go ahead.
Yeah. So, during the package replacement script, does it check to make sure that it has, if I understand you correctly, does it check to make sure that it only has one package associated with it as opposed to multiple to potentially cause conflicts? Is that what I'm hearing?
Right, and when it overwrites it with the newer package, it doesn't remove any secondary or third package that was also in that policy.
And it doesn't overwrite.
Right. So that script pulls down all of the packages that exist in that policy, and then it searches for that specific ID and deletes the following 5 lines. So it'll delete anything associated with any matching package, but it will leave the ones that have different IDs completely alone. So then when it goes in and replaces that policy ID with the new policy ID and the remaining information, it leaves those other 2 packages or 3 packages completely untouched because they don't have matching policy IDs, and then re-uploads the entire packages subsection, which has those untouched other 2 packages. So it only deletes the one that matters.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Next question.
Where'd it go?
Where? There you are.
Sure.
Sorry.
To kind of tie into his question, and maybe I missed over it, but is there, excuse me, after the package is replaced, do you have a portion that can potentially clear the logs so that someone doesn't have to manually do that?
So after the package is replaced, is there a portion that can clear the logs so that no one has to actually go in there after the fact?
Previously set to 1, I'm still going in and manually clearing logs after the fact, you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, it's just so he's manually clearing logs and wants to see if that can be automated. My script does not do that. Like I said, there's a lot of things like error checking and whatnot, and maybe some extensions in there. I mean, a lot of that stuff that's specified, for the install, failure templates, whatnot, it should be able to pull from what already exists there. It's not. It's doing a blanket overwrite. It was really just mainly an example. It's not something we're really using. Yeah, I mean, if you want to clear logs in that one, whenever it finds it and it looks to see if that policy is a one-time use, and you say, yeah, if you see this situation, go ahead and clear logs, that can be implemented. It's just not in the script that I currently wrote.
Awesome. Next question.
So even though you're not really using it, you make it available to the public so we can look at it as an example, like on our machine.
So even though it's not in use now, can you make it available so that we can use it as an example?
The slide at least, so we can look at what you did.
Yeah, the slides will be up. I'm not sure exactly where. I'm not sure if we're putting them up or if Jamf's going to be putting them up somewhere. I think they did that last year. But.
Yeah. I think they're recording this. Hello, world. In the back, he's all waving at me too. So we'll have that, and traditionally those are pretty high resolution, so you should be able to see a lot of that stuff. So that may be able to be helpful too.
Yeah, and if it gets fleshed out, I mean, I'd really, before I put this up with, our name on it or Expedia's name on it, I really want to really, comment it and really flesh it out for public consumption. This is not that. So yeah, I mean, if we ever use this in production and I see the need to really, spend time fleshing it, yeah, I'll make it public. But in the meantime, there's the slides that you can kind of look at.
Anybody from this side of the room? No? Any other questions? Oh, there you are. Say that one more time, I'm sorry. So are you doing any updates of computer records via the API? And if we are you seeing issues with smart group calculations or recalculations? Is that right? Okay.
I haven't seen any issues specifically using the API with smart groups. I don't know if there's very many that we actually have flags off of anything that I would be changing with the API. I have noticed that there was it's more of a display glitch than anything else, that sometimes if there's a smart group based on another group, you'll get some inaccurate accounts on the smart groups, but the actual computers that are included within don't seem to be noticed. So it's more of a display glitch, and you probably want to just remember that if you're looking at that for numbers. But I don't think I've seen anything with relation to the API specifically.
I think there was one lower one here.
Can I use the same idea to reorder installation events? So right now I have a package that's working, right? I update it, and there's a script, and then there's a package. Rather than creating another policy that governs this thing, I use the API to go in there and say, run the script before this package, or run this package before the script, or move things around based on the one thing that changed instead of replacing everything.
So the simpler version, if I could kind of rephrase, is can I use the API to specify a specific order of events so that way things that are kind of going at the same time or in the wrong order get corrected? Is that kind of what you're asking?
So there's not any way that I know of to do that directly via the API. I mean, you can go in and you can put a before or after on your scripts, which is part of the information that's stored for that. So you'd have to put in some sort of logic. So if you see this package, then make this a before script or something like that. I mean, you really could build that logic into it if you needed to. As for the package installation, I believe that's all just based on the priority of it. I don't think there's anything, the order that is listed when you get that XML object has nothing to do with installation order, unless it orders it for you, but that's done based on the priority of your packages.
Sure.
Question about radar. I'm assuming if you have a network segment set up in JSS, that'll be accounted.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So about radar specifically, if you have network segments set up, would that conflict with radar? Was the question.
And the answer is yes. Network segments pretty much take priority within the JSS. So, and you can use that to your advantage if you'd like, if you want to use something like Radar. If you have certain network segments that you know which server they drive to, and you can define those ones and leave other ones as undefined, and then Radar will basically take over when they're on those network subnets. But yeah, if you try and define a specific distribution point for something that already has a defined distribution point on that subnet, it'll look like it goes through, but it'll never change. It's almost like the JSS overwrites it immediately.
Because you're setting the change in the computer record itself, right?
Correct.
And so just the change patterns prioritized, the network segment.
Well,
So just real quick on that, so you're changing the information in the computer record itself, and it's about the priority and preference of the network segments versus that, right?
Right, yeah. So it doesn't really have a priority because, I mean, when the computer checks in, the JSS is actually is defining that distribution point if it's defined for that network segment. It has to do with order of operations. I'm going in with the API and I'm saying set it to this. It actually does set it for a split second. And then when that finishes out, then the computer grabs the JSS assigns the correct one because that computer just checked in with something. So it doesn't write it correctly. In the Radar script, I forgot what I call it, it's either verbose mode or like help mode or something like that, it will actually spit out an error saying that unable to set the distribution point, please make sure that the network segment is not defined for, and it spits out the IP of the computer, and that's logged in the syslog, I believe. So if you wanted to look at that, you can turn that error on and off if you don't care. Like if you expect that will fail sometimes, then you can just ignore it or you can turn it off. But if you're trying to figure out what's going on, there's some information that's stored in the syslog that you can look at.
Right up on top.
Specifically on the policy change, have you been able to get site information to restrict that, like replacement of the package or policy to within all the site?
So within, say one more time?
So, you have site,
Yeah.
so I'd like to be able to restrict the package replacement within a policy to only policies within a certain site.
So have we been able to take the policy replacement script and restrict it to a specific site, right? Okay.
Yeah, we're not using that. We're not really making much use of sites. However, that site information is clearly defined within the policy. It would not be hard at all to just look for that. Another grep basically just says site equals, this ID. And then if it doesn't equal that, then you can basically just start your while loop over again. Just put a continue on there and it'll go to the next value. So it would, if you'd like to do something like that, it would be really fairly trivial to do. I haven't personally done it, but yeah, it wouldn't be a problem.
So, in your policy replacement script, in your script there, it looked like you were using bash or something like that. In your more complex programs, are you still using shell scripting or are you using higher level language?
So in the examples given, we were using bash. Have you considered, or in more complex scenarios, using other scripting languages or other languages altogether?
We're actually kind of in the process of moving to a kind of a hybrid or more toward like a Python language deployment. I personally use bash for a lot of things as well, mainly just because I haven't gotten to Python too much and really gotten into it. I know bash very, very well. But the other side of that too is a lot of people are using bash, so I didn't want to like murky the waters with something that they might not know as well. So I didn't want to present a Python example. But yeah, I mean, a lot of this should be or can be done / should be done, especially with the XML parsing that's built in basically to Python. Should be done through Python if you want a more robust example. But it can be done in either. You just kind of have to think about it. Bash is a bit slower, especially when parsing XML, but it gets there.
Any other questions?
Right there.
On that subject, just one question is a GitHub project that's Python JSS. It's related back to API that's wrapped with so we can't do that. It's a project going on now.
Well, what's the project name again?
It's called Python JSS.
Python JSS. So there's already a project called Python. The question is kind of a statement. There's already a project, Python JSS, that does similar things. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's API
does API.
Right. Yeah, I heard there's some Ruby plugins as well. There's a number of different people that are working on interacting with the API. I'm really excited for it, honestly. Anything that we can really use to extend it is less work that I have to do manually and tediously.
Could you walk us through the decision process? Like, obviously, you had a pain point. You were spending X hours a week. Finally, you decided to use the API. And you sat down and made something. How long did it take you to recover that time?
Sure. Can you walk us through the process, the decision you made at which point where you said, there's a pain point, and now, I'm going to sit down and actually write something. And the follow-on question was, how long did it take you before you start recouping that from an ROI perspective?
It really depends on the actual individual project. Sometimes, with the radar project in particular, we looked at doing it via subnets versus API for quite a while before we finally went to the API. The biggest thing that really cinched it for us was the fact that we had these subnets which span multiple buildings, and we basically said, well, we can't do it any other way. But it really depends. I mean, Charles mentioned that we were moving from Casper 8 to 9, and we actually did a full migration versus an upgrade path, just because we wanted to clean things up a bit, a little house cleaning. But we're extensively utilizing the API for that as well, just because we need to figure out, which computers have migrated, which ones haven't migrated, and just trying to, report that out. And going through thousands of machines, I don't know about you, but I don't want to have to do that. And the machine names may change and all sorts of things. So I wrote up a quick script that goes through and grabs every single machine from the JSS 8, looks for the same UUID in JSS 9, and if it doesn't find it, it then looks for the same serial number, just in case we did a logic port swap. And then reports all the machines that have not moved over, or all the ones that are in the process of moving over and aren't quite fully managed yet. And for an example like that, I wrote that in probably wrote and tested in a couple hours, and it saved us numerous days worth of going through. And I can run a report off whenever I want now. Anybody can run a report off whenever they want now of what's actually migrated, so our help desk can just run that script. Wait a little while. It takes a while to go through that many machines. But then, they can just spit out the report and work off of it, and they can make tickets based on it. So it really depends. There's some that, the payoff isn't as quick. We don't, to recoup that time quite as quick. But then there's another one, like that specific example of, it took me almost no time at all, and it took me more time to actually, bang my head against this trying to start to do it than actually just write the script to begin with. So you really can look for some of those low-hanging fruit that, again, if it's something really something easy to do, but is really meticulous or very detail-oriented that you have to go through hundreds or thousands of things, API is the way to go. You do not want to be doing that manually. It'll pull your hair out.
Just to go back to the languages, on Thursday morning in my session, I'll be releasing open source, a Ruby framework that directly interacts with the API.
Okay, cool. So more of a statement, but on Thursday there's going to be a session on Ruby that's going to be released during there that works with the API as well. So if you're interested in that,
Yeah, I'll
attend
be
the
there.
Thursday session. And he'll be there. So you can just swap. Awesome. Anything else? Can't see, but go ahead. Are extension attributes exposed over the API?
The extension attributes, yeah, they are. So the scripts in there and whatnot, you can look at the extension attributes in there. That's how we're looking at them. As for if you're looking at what values a computer has, I'm not sure. I'm sure they are. I haven't looked directly, but I assume they are. Thank you. Yeah, those are probably the computer record.
Can we use the API to pull usage metrics, like for example, whether people are using self-service or how many Macs we used in the last month?
Can use the API to pull out usage metrics. An example is given, like how often they're using self-service. And what was the other example?
Sure. For example, how many Macs we imaged in the last month?
How many Macs we imaged for the last month being another example.
So I don't know is the answer to that. I've never even tried. I'm sure there's some data you can get at that shows that last imaging time you can cycle through every machine. I know there's also, and I haven't really dug into this that much myself, but there's like an events API, which is separate from the REST API, that you could do something like that whenever a machine's image to generate an event, and you could look at that information. It can all be done through an API. It's just a different API. Rather than being driven from the machines, you're telling the JSS to generate an event when something happens.
Questions? Going once, going twice. Oh,
Is there
one right there.
More of another statement on the extension attributes. I've played around with it, you can view them, but whenever I try to update them, it just mass updates for all devices.
So more of a statement, but extension attributes, you can read them just fine, but you're finding that your personal experience has been that if you try to update them, then it what does it do?
It's a mass update.
It does a mass update on all of them.
Yeah, I would definitely file that as a bug if you can get some steps to reproduce that and file it as a bug, because I wouldn't want that to happen. Oh, perfect.
There actually is a bug filed on
Okay.
SoundSign.
Nice.
There.
And
You're using radar to update the closest distribution point. How do you organize your machines to JSS without network definitions?
So if you're going to use the network flag, sorry, I'm sorry, say that again.
If you're using radar to set the machine's default distribution point, how do you organize your machines into JSS without network segments?
So if you're going to use radar to update the distribution points for the computers, how do you use the network segments in your JSS?
so we do have some network segments defined, especially with the hardwired networks. Those are a little bit easier. And we will update the location when they're at something that we know where they are. Like like I said, we have one Wi-Fi subnet across 3 buildings, but generally those 3 buildings are going to have the same actual desk plugs. So when they finally plug into one of those, it will update that information. Whereas on the Wi-Fi one, it's not necessarily going to update it at all. It'll update the distribution point, but it won't update where it's located, that site information. We also have a naming scheme, which includes maybe not where it is necessarily currently, but it has where it was assigned, and it should be updated when somebody physically moves to a different assigned building. So we have that information of where it should be.
So we have time for one more question. So if anybody has really exciting one.
Well, I just wanted to say on his, you can Active Directory, something like that. If you have the building location populated in there, when it does the user lookup, you can pre-populate
Yep.
devices, desktops,
So it's not,
worry about network segments. Like someone goes to a different building, they check on the Wi-Fi. Oh, now it looks like they're in this building. They're actually just there for meetings.
so if I could repeat that, it sounds like you could use Active Directory and other mechanisms to update that as well.
Yeah. And if there's another, more information you need to dig in and it gets in a different way, there's always other ways to get at that information, and then you can use the API to upload it. You might have to, resort to something a little bit less known, but it's available to you.
Thank you very much for attending. Thank you to Josh and Charles from Expedia. Thank you, thank you, thank you.